A young woman leaves her apartment before sunrise, heading to the gym just like every other morning. Within minutes, she is kidnapped. Hours later, security cameras capture her making desperate ATM withdrawals while visibly terrified. By the end of the day, she is dead. The footage still exists. The final hours were caught on camera, and what investigators discovered next would shock an entire city.
There are not words to describe what we lost and how our lives have forever changed.
The city of Boston had already endured one of the darkest years in its history. It was the summer of 2013. Just months earlier, the Boston Marathon bombing had shaken the city to its core. Residents were slowly rebuilding their sense of safety, trying to move forward after a tragedy that had dominated headlines around the world. But on July 23rd, another nightmare was about to unfold. This time, the victim was 24-year-old Amy Lord. Amy had a career she was building at a digital marketing company, a boyfriend, a tight circle of friends, and a daily routine she never broke. Every morning, Amy was up by 5:30. She'd get ready, head to the gym before work, and start her day with purpose and energy. People who knew her described her the same way every single time. Full of life, incredibly kind, the kind of person whose energy was almost electric. She was not someone you forgot after meeting. On the morning of July 23rd, Amy never made it to the gym, and by 9 o'clock, she hadn't shown up to work either. That was the first sign something was catastrophically wrong. Her manager, unable to reach her, called her emergency contact, her parents. They hadn't heard from her either. Something was deeply off. Her mother later recalled that Amy always answered her phone, always replied to texts. Silence from Amy didn't just feel unusual. It felt like a scream. Her parents didn't wait for an explanation. They got in their car and drove straight to her South Boston apartment on Dorchester Avenue. When police arrived at 11 a.m. to conduct a welfare check, they found the family already there. And at first glance, nothing was wrong. The apartment was tidy. The doors and windows were intact. There were no signs of a struggle inside. For a brief, hopeful moment, officers thought maybe this would end simply, that Amy had overslept somewhere, or her phone had died, or there was a perfectly reasonable explanation waiting around the corner. Then one of the officers asked about her car. Amy's mother answered without hesitation. Her daughter drove a black Jeep Cherokee. The moment those words left her mouth, the officers froze. Because earlier that morning, at around 8 a.m., a black Jeep Cherokee had been found burning violently on the side of a road in South Boston. When investigators immediately ran the license plate through their system, the confirmation came back fast. It was Amy's car. In an instant, a welfare check became a murder investigation. Detectives moved quickly. One of their first steps was pulling Amy's bank records, and what they found gave them their first concrete thread to pull. That same morning, Amy had made 5 separate cash withdrawals from 5 different ATM machines on Columbia Road, Southampton Street, Massachusetts Avenue, Adams Street, and one more, across South Boston and Dorchester, all within a staggering 47-minute window. The banks were contacted immediately. Surveillance footage was requested, and when the recordings began coming in, what investigators saw on those screens was something that made hardened detectives go silent. The footage showed Amy at each ATM, but she wasn't alone. A man was with her. He wore a baseball cap pulled down low. His face was covered with a shirt or mask, deliberately obscuring his identity in every single frame. He was driving her car while she sat in the passenger seat. Each time she got out to walk to the ATM machine, she did so alone. But she always walked back and got back into that passenger seat. She never ran. She never screamed. She never asked for help. And that was the detail that haunted investigators most. Why didn't she run? The answer came when they looked more closely at the footage. Amy's left eye was visibly swollen. Bruises covered her face. She had clearly been beaten, and beaten badly. Whatever that man had threatened her with, whatever he had told her would happen if she tried to escape, it had worked. She was absolutely terrified, moving through each ATM transaction like a person who had already calculated that compliance was the only thing keeping her alive. The total amount withdrawn was $960. The detectives then pulled street surveillance from a camera positioned across from Amy's apartment building on Dorchester Avenue at exactly 5:37 in the morning, right when Amy would have been stepping out to head to the gym. A man was caught on camera walking along her street. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was just walking. And then Amy opened her front door, and everything changed in a fraction of a second. The man changed direction instantly, rushed toward her, and shoved her back inside the building before she could react. The door closed behind them both. It didn't open again for 15 minutes. Investigators believe that in those 15 minutes, inside the lobby of her own apartment building, Amy was violently assaulted. A contact lens was found on the vestibule floor, consistent with a violent impact. A mark on the wall suggested she had been thrown against it. By the time that door opened again, the woman who walked out was no longer free. She was a prisoner, being guided at knife point toward her own vehicle by a man whose face the cameras could never quite capture clearly enough. While investigators were piecing together the ATM footage and trying to identify the suspect, the day took its most devastating turn. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a cyclist named Edward Landry was riding through Stony Brook Reservation in Hyde Park, a wooded area miles away from where Amy lived and miles from where her car had been found burning. Deep on a remote path called Bold Knob Path, he spotted something in the woods. He stopped, and what he saw made him grab his phone with shaking hands. In his frantic 911 call, he could barely form the words. He described seeing a young woman, unclothed, lying motionless on the ground. He said he couldn't see her face. It was Amy Lord. The medical examiner's report delivered a finding so brutal it was difficult to read aloud in a courtroom. Amy had been stabbed more than 40 times. The cause of death was determined to be sharp force injuries to the neck and torso, combined with asphyxia by strangulation. She had been killed in one of the most savage ways imaginable. Her body then left alone in those woods, hidden from the world. She was 24 years old. She had done everything right that morning. She had simply opened her front door. Her community was devastated. In her hometown of Wilbraham, Massachusetts, white ribbons appeared on mailboxes, on lapels, and tied around the large trees lining Main Street. The town went quiet. A young woman who had been a cheerleading captain, an honors student, a dedicated professional, and a light in every room she entered was gone. And the city of Boston, still healing from one tragedy, had to find a way to absorb another one. What investigators didn't yet know was that the man who murdered Amy Lord wasn't finished. That same night, at around midnight, just 2 blocks from Amy's apartment in South Boston, a 21-year-old woman named Kayla Valentine was returning home from work. As she punched in the code to her building's front door, she felt a presence directly behind her. Before she could turn around, she was shoved violently inside. Her head hit the ground. A man jumped on top of her and began stabbing her. She screamed. She begged him to take everything and just leave. And then she fought back, kicking him with everything she had until he lost his balance and fell. The attacker fled into the night. Kayla had been stabbed 5 times. Her roommates, hearing the screaming, rushed downstairs and found her bleeding heavily on the floor. They called 911 immediately. At the hospital, Kayla was able to describe her attacker, a Hispanic man, wearing a dark shirt and a Boston Red Sox cap. Outside her building, police found a trail of blood that didn't all belong to her. The attacker had stabbed himself in the hand during the assault. Surveillance footage confirmed it, showing a man walking away from the scene with his left hand wrapped tightly in his shirt. Then came the break that cracked everything open. While Kayla was being treated in the hospital, her roommate spotted a man in the lobby of that same hospital, there to receive treatment for a cut on his left hand. He matched the description perfectly. The roommates immediately called the police. Officers arrived, confirmed the match with the surveillance footage, and arrested him on the spot. His name was Edwin J. Alemany. When asked about the cut on his hand, Alemany claimed he'd gotten into a fight with a man at a gas station. Police checked. There was no evidence of any such altercation. None whatsoever. He was charged with the assault on Kayla Valentine. But as investigators dug deeper, the connections to Amy Lord's murder became impossible to ignore. The method was identical. A blitz-style ambush at a building entrance. A victim alone. A predator who struck without warning. Forensic analysis of Alemany's sneakers revealed traces of blood. When tested, that blood matched Amy Lord's DNA. Eyewitnesses then identified Alemany as the man seen driving Amy's Jeep Cherokee that morning. Separate footage from a gas station in the Roslindale neighborhood of Boston showed him purchasing gasoline, the same gasoline used to set Amy's car on fire. Edwin Alemany had spent his entire life circling in and out of a system that never quite stopped him. He had a history of severe mental illness dating back to childhood, hallucinations, depression, documented psychotic episodes. He had been admitted to psychiatric facilities repeatedly as a minor and spent his teenage years under the supervision of the Department of Youth Services. When he turned 18, the system aged him out. He stopped taking his medication, and over the following decade, he was arrested 14 times for trespassing, assault, making death threats, and theft. He had threatened to kill both himself and others on multiple occasions. He had attacked another woman in September 2012, a crime that later led to the demotion of a Boston police detective and the reprimand of multiple officers for how it was handled. On the morning he murdered Amy Lord, Alemany had no plan. The street surveillance footage made that devastatingly clear. He wasn't waiting for her. He wasn't targeting her specifically. He was walking past her building when she opened the door, and he acted in an instant. He used the money he stole from her to pay his bills, buy a new phone, purchase lottery tickets, drink alcohol, and eat Chinese food. He spent the afternoon drunk. He argued with his girlfriend that night, stormed out, and attacked Kayla Valentine on the way. In less than 24 hours, he had assaulted 3 women, one of whom never came home. The trial began in May 2015. Alemany's defense team pursued an insanity defense with everything they had, arguing that their client was a profoundly ill individual who could not be held criminally responsible for his actions. They pointed to his lifetime of psychiatric hospitalizations, his attempts to take his own life twice while awaiting trial, and his documented history of psychosis. They asked the jury to look at Edwin Alemany not as a criminal, but as a victim of a mental health system that had failed him. The prosecution responded with a different framing entirely, and it was devastating in its simplicity. 3 real victims. Alexandra Cruz, who was attacked and survived. Kayla Valentine, who was stabbed 5 times and survived. And Amy Elizabeth Lord, forever 24 years old, who did not. The prosecutor asked the jury directly, how many women have to be attacked for it to be enough? How many women have to be stabbed? The answer, he said, was that today, in that courtroom, it was finally enough. The jury deliberated and rejected the insanity defense on all counts. Edwin Alemany was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed carjacking, armed robbery, arson of a motor vehicle, and assault-related charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Murder in the first degree, so you're hereby sentenced to for and during the term of your natural life.
When the verdict was read aloud, Amy's family broke down in tears in the courtroom. They chose not to speak publicly after the verdict was announced. Her mother later offered the only word she could, that for their family there would never truly be closure, that there would always be an unimaginable, unrelenting pain caused by a senseless act of violence.
The reality is for us, there will never truly be closure. There will always be an unimaginable, unrelenting pain caused by a senseless act of violence.
Alemany attempted to appeal his conviction, arguing that his attorneys had violated his rights during the trial. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, ruling that the evidence against him was overwhelming. A subsequent federal appeal was also rejected. He remains in prison today, serving a life sentence with no path to freedom. The cameras at those 5 ATM machines recorded Amy Lord's final hours with merciless clarity. They showed the bruises on her face. They showed her fear. They showed a woman trying to survive by doing exactly what she was told, holding on to the hope that compliance would bring her safely home. The footage preserved every moment of her ordeal for investigators, for the courtroom, and ultimately for the jury that put her killer away forever. Those cameras told the truth when no one else was there to tell it. Amy Lord was not a statistic. She was not just a case number or a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone whose absence ripped a hole in the lives of everyone who loved her. And while justice was served, it came at a cost that no verdict can ever fully repay. What happened to Amy on that July morning in Boston is a reminder, permanent and painful, that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just walking down the street, and sometimes the only witness is a camera.